Hello and welcome to IP Study video lectures, and today we are going to discuss chapter 10 from grade 8 social science, and the name of the chapter is resources. So in this chapter we will be covering some important topics like resources, types of resources, natural resources, its classifications, human made resources, human resources, conservation of resources and sustainable development. So let's discuss what resources are. So when we say resources, what is a resource? So a resource is a supply or a source from which we obtain benefits. Okay, so anything in the environment or nature which can be utilized to satisfy the needs or desires of human can be considered a resource. Okay, however, we should understand that in the process of extracting or accessing this resource, it is necessary that it is technological accessible, or we should have the technology to get the resource. It should be economically feasible, or it means there should be some profit. The cost of production or extracting the resource should not be very high, and lastly, culturally acceptable. So when we fulfill all this, a particular substance becomes a resource. So resources are also called gifts of nature because it is the nature that provide us with all these resources. For example, soil, minerals, wind, air, forest, wildlife. So all of these resources are provided by nature. So let us see the factors that influence the formation of resources. So time and technology are two important factors that influences the formation of resources. When you talk about time, it is a very important factor because it influences the availability and accessibility of resources. Okay, because the demand of a specific or a particular resources vary with time, and this is due to change in population, this is due to technological advancement, and also change in the demand or needs of the people. Okay, also time plays a crucial role in formation or creation of resources and also its replenishment. So second factor is technology. So it is the human intelligence and knowledge that lead to development of advanced technology, and these technologies help us to extract, utilize and even manage resources, right? Because of this technology advancement, we humans are able to extract minerals from far remote places. Simple example, we can say that before the modern civilization, in ancient times, we humans had no knowledge about fossil fuels, or nor we had the technology to process and utilize it. As such, we did not utilize fossil fuels, or we did not see it as a resource. So now let us see value of a resource. So what do we understand by value? Value means worth, and the value of resource depends upon its importance, significance or utility. As we have already discussed, resource is something that we utilize to satisfy our need. As such, a resource has value. It can be either economic or it do not have any economic value. So what does economic value mean? Economic value means that the value of that particular resource can be measured in terms of money. For example, diamond. On the other hand, a resource might not have a economic value. For example, a beautiful landscape. Okay, however, that landscape is important and can satisfy our needs and or demand. For example, I already said a beautiful landscape. Okay, if we look at here, a very beautiful example has been given about about a resource having economic value or no economic value. Our mothers cook food, right? And she knows a lot of recipe and ingredients. However, that does not possess any monetary value. So it is not it does not have any economic value. But if your mother or our mother decides to make a book on all those recipes, and if that book is sold in the market, it possesses economic value because it brings money. So now that book is a economic that book has a economic value. So now let us discuss another topic, that is types of resources. So resources can be categorized into three types: natural resources, human-made resources, and lastly human resources. So now let us discuss what natural resources are. So natural resources occur naturally in nature, okay, and these resources can be utilized in their natural form with little modification. For example, plants, air, soil, wildlife. So these are all examples of natural resources. However, in certain cases, we might need some tools or technology to utilize these natural resources efficiently and effectively. For example, water is a natural resource, but in order to produce or generate electricity from water, we do require some technology or tools. Or another example, coal. Coal is a natural resource. To generate heat or produce energy from coal, we do require some technological advancement or tools. So now let us see classification of natural resources. So natural resources can be further classified on the basis of their level of development and utilization, origin, stock and distribution, and lastly exhaustibility. Okay. So now let us see the classification of resources on the basis of level of development and utilization. So on this basis, we have actual resources and potential resources. So what are actual resources? So the resources which are currently or presently utilized and we already know their quantity and quality. These are called actual resources. So I repeat again, resources which are currently utilized and we already know their quantity and quality. For example, water. Water is an example of an actual resources. How? Because we know the quantity of water on earth. We are currently utilizing water for many purposes. We are utilizing it for in our domestic household. Not only this, we are utilizing it in generating electricity or irrigating the agricultural field. So water is a very good example of actual resources. On the other hand, what are potential resources? So resources whose actual quantity is not known and is currently not utilized is called potential resources. Its quantity is also not known and it is currently not utilized. Maybe it's because we do not have the technology or the technology is not that advanced for its utilization. For example, uranium reserve in Ladakh. We know that there is some reserve of uranium in Ladakh, but we do not possess the technology to access or extract it. However, we should understand that our potential resources can become actual resources with development of technology or technological advancement. For example, before 200 or 300 years, we humans had no idea that wind can be used to generate electricity. But with the technological advancement and increase in knowledge, skill, we today possess the technology to convert wind energy into electricity. Second classification is based on origin. So on the basis of origin, natural resources can be classified into biotic resources and abiotic resources. So what are biotic resources? So resources that comes from living source are called biotic resource. For example, plants, animals. Here example of forest is given, which is also an example of biotic resources. On the other hand, abiotic resources comes from non-living source. Example, rocks, soil, air, and so on. So this is an example of abiotic resources. Here rocks and soil is given. So third classification is based on the distribution. So on the basis of distribution, resources can be ubiquitous or localized. So ubiquitous resources are those resources which are evenly distributed all over the world or all around the world. For example, water. We do find water distributed all over the world. On the other hand, localized resources are those resources which are not evenly distributed and can be found only in particular region. For example, fossil fuels. We do not find fossil fuel everywhere. Mostly we find huge reserves of fossil fuel in Middle East. So it is an example of localized resources. So now on the basis of exhaustibility, resources can be classified into renewable resources and non-renewable resources. So renewable resources are those resources which can be reproduced or renewed easily and quickly. Okay. Even once they are depleted, the rate in which they reproduce or gets renewed is quick. However, it varies depending upon the type of resource. For example, agriculture crops, it gets renewed quickly. On the other hand, forest, it takes a bit longer time to reproduce or renew. Now, on the other hand, non-renewable resources, once utilized, it gets exhausted. And these resources are also limited in nature. For example, petroleum, coal, fossil fuels. So, once utilized, it gets exhausted and it takes long period of time to renew itself. Now, let us see what are human-made resources. So, resources that are created by human to satisfy human needs or wants are called human-made resources. For example, bridge. Okay. These resources are not found in nature, but it is created by human beings, utilizing the resources provided by nature. And to create a human-made resources, it requires skills, knowledge, and to certain extent, technology or tools. Okay. For example, steel is not found in nature. However, iron ore is found. So, in order to produce steel, human has to make sure that they have technology, they know the skill, or they have to possess that intelligence to convert that natural resources into human-made resource. So now let us discuss human resources. As we all know, humans or the people are the greatest resource because it is the human with their demand and with their ability or knowledge create or convert the gifts provided by nature into resource. Okay. The ideas, knowledge, invention and discoveries of humans lead to creation of many resources. Also, we have to understand that every discovery or invention leads to many other discovery and invention. For example, the discovery of fire. Okay, it led to the beginning of cooking. On the other hand, the invention of wheel led to the creation of different modes of transport. So now let us see what is human resource development. So once we invest in the education, the skill, the knowledge and health of the people, we make sure that the humans become a valuable resources. Okay. So improving the quality of people's skill leads to creation of different resource and we can utilize them properly and efficiently. So this is called human resource development. So now let us discuss conservation of resources. As we all know, many resources are limited in nature. However, our demands and our desires are unlimited. So while using or utilizing resources, we have to make sure that we are also preserving it. So using resources carefully is called conservation of resources. Okay. So now let us take example of petroleum. We have been utilizing petroleum and the rate of utilization is very high. As such, within 150 years, the whole stock or reserve of petroleum might get exhausted. As such, the future generation might face difficulties. So, as the present generation, we have a duty to utilize resource carefully so that we also preserve it for the future generation. So now let us discuss the topic of sustainable development. So what is sustainable development? We all know we have been utilizing resources and we have to make sure that there is a balance between our needs and the need to conserve these resources. It is important that we live and preserve many resources for the coming generation. So sustainable development means that we should utilize resources in such a way that we are fulfilling our demand, but at the same time we are also saving it for the future generation. Okay. And we can follow the principle of 3 R's to make sustainable development possible. So what are the 3 R's? The 3 R's are reduce, reuse and recycle. So what do we understand by reduce? It means that we should reduce our consumption of specific resources. For example, if we are going to the school and if our school is very nearby, we can take bicycle instead of going in a car so that we can conserve some petrol. On the other hand, we can also conserve electricity. If no one is in a room, we can switch off the fan, we can switch off the AC so that we can conserve electricity. So, reduce means to reduce our consumption of resource. Now, the second principle is the principle of reuse. So, we can reuse many old items by converting them into something useful. For example, our old clothes, instead of throwing it away, we can convert into doormats. And now the third principle, recycle. We know that many things can be recycled. For example, paper, glass, iron, tin. So these can be recycled into new things. For example, newspaper can be recycled, right? We can also recycle tin, iron, and we can make something new from all those items. So in this way, by following these 3 principles, we can make sustainable development possible. We come to the end of the chapter. Now let us summarize some important points that we have discussed in the lecture. A resource is anything that is used to satisfy our human needs, right? So the utility of resources add value to it, and value means worth. Resources can be classified into natural resources, human-made resources and human resource. Natural resources can be classified into different types based on the level of utilization and development, such as actual and potential. On the other hand, on the basis of origin, natural resources can be classified into biotic and abiotic resources. On the basis of distribution, natural resources can be classified into ubiquitous and localized resources. And based on their exhaustibility, natural resources can be classified into renewable and non-renewable. Human-made resources are those resources which are created by humans to fulfill their needs. And human resources refers to the quality and quantity of people. We should use and conserve resources so that we do fulfill our need. On the other hand, we also preserve them for our coming generation. And this is called sustainable development, and in order to make sustainable development possible, we should follow the principle of 3 R. And these are reduce, reuse and recycle. So with this, I end the chapter. I hope I was able to clarify your doubts regarding this chapter, and now we'll again meet in our next lecture. Thank you.